The air of the Grand Chamber on Citadel Prime tasted of 1,000 different worlds and 1,000,000 filtered anxieties. For Calyx, first archivist of the Epsilon Hydri Collective, it was an overwhelming symphony of sensory input. His primary tendrils, each tipped with a chemoreceptive node, trembled as they deciphered the lingering atmospheric traces. The ozone tang of the silicon-based geodes, the faint, sweet decay of the fungal lumina delegates, and the sharp, metallic scent of barely contained aggression from the Cathar Imperium's envoy. Beside him, his junior colleague, Ula, kept her own appendages coiled tightly, her nictitating membranes blinking rapidly over her large, dark eyes. Her skin, a complex matrix of chromatophores, cycled through muted patterns of nervous gray and inquisitive violet. "It is louder than the archives," Ula subvocalized, her message a subtle vibration through the polished obsidian floor that only Calyx could perceive. "The archives contain the echoes of history, little one," Calyx sent back, his own skin a calm, steady cerulean. "This place contains the chaotic friction of history being made. There is a significant difference in resonance." This was their first rotation as delegates. The Hydrians, as a species, were not political. They were observers, recorders. Their great archives were the most comprehensive repository of knowledge in the known galaxy, a sacred trust they had maintained for millennia. But the galaxy was growing more fractious, and the Council had insisted that a species holding so much history could no longer remain neutral observers. They had to have a voice. So Calyx, the keeper of 10,000 cycles of galactic history, was here to speak, and Ula, his most promising student, was here to learn. Calyx's stalk-mounted eyes swiveled, taking in the immense amphitheater. Anti-gravity pods for hundreds of species floated in a spiraling nebula around the central podium. Crystalline entities shimmered, gaseous beings swirled within containment fields, and beings of flesh and carapace postured and conferred. Each had their own agenda, their own ancient grievances and burgeoning ambitions. His gaze drifted past the hulking, chitinous form of Warlord Zax of the Cathar, past the chittering avian Kriya delegation, and settled on a small, unassuming pod near the chamber's nadir. The humans. They were, to an archivist, a living paradox. A species so young, so explosively expansive, yet so maddeningly opaque. They had burst onto the galactic scene only a few centuries ago, their technology elegant but not revolutionary, their biology unremarkable. Their single most defining trait in the political sphere was their silence. The human delegation, currently comprised of a single female named Ambassador Evelyn Reed and 2 aides, rarely spoke. They attended every session, listened intently, cast their votes without comment, and left. They engaged in trade, in cultural exchange, but in the halls of power they were ghosts, their silence a profound and unsettling void in the constant clamor of galactic diplomacy. "They are watching," Ula vibrated, her focus also locked on the human pod. The female Reed, her eyes do not scan the room, they affix, one delegate at a time. It is a very deliberate pattern of observation. Calyx extended a slender sensory filament, tasting the recycled air around the human pod. He found nothing. No elevated pheromones of aggression or fear, no bioelectric field fluctuations. Just the calm, steady metabolic output of a living organism at rest. It was unnatural. Every other being in the chamber was a broadcasting station of intent. The humans were a vacuum. The great resonant chimes of the Citadel sounded, signaling the start of the session. The ambient noise subsided, replaced by the hum of translation matrices and life support systems. The speaker, a venerable geode whose crystalline form refracted the chamber's light into 1,000 rainbows, began the proceedings. The agenda was routine for the first few cycles. Trade disputes, shipping lane maintenance, the formal censure of a minor species for unauthorized stellar harvesting. Calyx made meticulous notes, his tentacles dancing over a data slate, while Ula absorbed everything, her memory banks, both biological and cybernetic, whirring silently. Then the crisis of the hour was brought forth. The Cathar Imperium, a species whose entire culture was predicated on martial expansion, had begun annexing several independent colony worlds along the rimward edge. These were not unclaimed territories, but sovereign outposts populated by a mix of species, none of whom were powerful enough to resist the Cathar's formidable war machine. The Kree delegate, a flurry of iridescent feathers and agitated chirps, took the floor. Warlord Zax, your forces violate 200 years of established council law. The Treaty of Pax Secundus is not a suggestion. It is the bedrock of our shared civilization. You will withdraw your brood fleets at once. Warlord Zax, a towering figure of black and red carapace, rose in his pod. His mandibles clicked, a sound amplified by the chamber's acoustics into a series of threatening cracks. The sovereign outposts you so weep for were squalid, mismanaged worlds festering on our border. The Cathar Imperium brought them order, stability, and purpose. They should be grateful. We are civilizing them. The debate devolved quickly. Sanctions were proposed. The Cathar's primary trade partners, a species of methane-breathing merchants, argued against them, citing economic collapse. Species bordering Cathar space pleaded for a swift, decisive response, their representatives trembling with fear. Throughout the escalating chaos, Calyx kept one eye stalk trained on the human pod. Ambassador Reed sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She watched the proceedings with a placid, almost detached curiosity, like a scholar observing a predictable chemical reaction. Why do they not speak? Ula vibrated, a tremor of frustration in her signal. Their trade routes are affected. Several of the annexed colonies had human populations. Their silence is illogical. Patience, Ula, Calyx replied, though he shared her bafflement. To record history, one must first allow it to unfold. The human strategy is inaction. We must catalog this inaction as thoroughly as we would an act of war. Finally, the speaker called for a vote on the harshest sanctions package. A complete embargo on all Cathar trade, a freezing of their interstellar assets, and a formal declaration of imperial aggression. The tally appeared as glowing runes in the center of the chamber. It passed by a margin of over 90%. A wave of relief washed through the assembly. Warlord Zax, however, threw back his head and emitted a grating laugh that echoed through the hall. Your sanctions are meaningless. Your embargoes are gnats biting at my armor. The Imperium is self-sufficient. We will continue our righteous expansion, and if any of you stand in our way, your worlds will be next to receive the gift of Cathar order. He leaned forward, his multifaceted eyes fixing on the speaker. This council is a fossil, and I am the hammer that will shatter it. A cold dread silenced the chamber. This was more than defiance. It was a declaration of war on the entire galactic order. Delegates stirred uneasily. The speaker's crystalline form seemed to dim. The moment was teetering on the precipice of open, galaxy-wide conflict. And then, for the first time in the entire session, the humans moved. Ambassador Evelyn Reed rose slowly to her feet. Her movement was so deliberate, so contrary to the panicked energy in the room, that it drew every eye. The chamber fell utterly silent. Even Warlord Zax paused his tirade, turning his massive head to stare at the small, soft-skinned mammal. Calyx felt a strange thrum of anticipation. His archivist sense, honed over centuries of sifting through pivotal moments in history, told him this was one of them. The fulcrum on which an age would turn. Ambassador Reed did not approach the podium. She did not activate her microphone. She simply stood in her pod, her expression unreadable, and looked directly at Warlord Zax. The air crackled with unspoken expectation. Was this it? Would the humans finally add their voice, their military might, their economic weight to the condemnation? She said nothing. Instead, she raised her right hand, palm open, and then slowly, with an almost liturgical grace, she lifted her index finger, pointing it toward the vaulted ceiling of the grand chamber. And she spoke a single phrase, her voice calm, clear, and carrying an impossible weight that needed no amplification. The silence protocol is invoked. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Calyx registered confusion. A protocol. There was no such human protocol listed in the Council Accords. Warlord Zax scoffed, his mandibles beginning to click again. Then the universe broke. It was not a power outage. A power outage is a cessation of energy, an absence. This was a presence. A heavy, suffocating presence that descended upon the chamber like a shroud. The brilliant lights of the citadel did not go out. They were smothered, dimming to a deep, bruised violet. The constant hum of a million different technologies, Translators, life support, data slates, the anti-gravity pods themselves, did not cease. It was erased. One moment it was there, the next, the very concept of its sound had been expunged from reality. Calyx's data slate went inert in his grasp, not dead, but fundamentally inert, as if its components had forgotten their purpose. His connection to the Citadel's network, to Ulla's subvocalizations, to the great archives light years away, vanished. He was an island, adrift in a sea of absolute, profound quiet. His own body felt heavy, his anti-gravity pod sinking a few centimeters with a lurch that sent a jolt of panic through him. He looked at Ulla. Her skin was a frantic, flashing pattern of pure terror, but no sound emerged from her. He saw the Kriya delegate fall from its perch, its wings beating uselessly in the thick, strange air. He saw Warlord Zax frozen in place, his mighty carapace still, his multifaceted eyes wide with something Calyx had never expected to see in a Cathar. Abject horror. The entire chamber of 1,000 beings was locked in a tableau of suspended animation and silent shock. The only thing that moved was Ambassador Evelyn Reed. She stood serene in the twilight, her finger still pointed upward, her eyes closed. She looked like a priestess in the midst of a holy rite, the calm center of a storm that had consumed reality itself. It felt like an eternity, a lifetime spent in a silent, purple purgatory. But Calyx's internal chronometer, a biological process as reliable as a star's decay, kept running. He counted the beats. 1, 2, 3, a rhythm of pure biology in a world where physics had gone on holiday. He reached 42, 43. On the 44th beat, reality snapped back into place. The light returned with a painful flash. The sound crashed back in a deafening wave, the hum of 1,000,000 devices, the shouts and screams of 1,000 delegates, the alarms of the Citadel's emergency systems. Calyx's data slate flickered to life. His pod stabilized. The connection to Ulla slammed back into his consciousness. Overload, overload, sensory input critical, her panicked signal screamed, but Calyx's attention was elsewhere. He was looking at Warlord Zax. The great Cathar warrior had collapsed in his pod. He was shaking, a low, guttural moan escaping his mandibles. The fearsome red patterns on his carapace had faded to a sickly, pale orange. He looked broken. Across the chamber, the human delegation was already moving. Their pod disengaged from its mooring and began to glide silently toward the exit. Ambassador Reed had lowered her hand and now stood with her back to the chaos, her posture as calm and composed as it had been before. She hadn't even glanced at the devastation she had wrought. The chamber was in utter pandemonium. Delegates were screaming, demanding answers. The speaker's crystalline form pulsed with frantic light, its synthesized voice calling for order in a dozen languages at once. But Calyx saw none of it. He saw only the silent, retreating form of the human ambassador. 43 seconds. A precise, deliberate, and utterly terrifying demonstration of a power that had no name in any of his archives. A power that could unmake the laws of physics and shatter the will of the galaxy's most feared warrior race without firing a single shot. Ulla, Calyx subvocalized, his own signal trembling for the first time in a century. Record everything, every sensory detail, every atmospheric fluctuation, every residual energy signature. We are no longer here as delegates. His cerulean skin shifted to a deep, determined indigo, the color of deep archive research. We are here as archivists, and we have just witnessed the birth of the most important historical record of our era, the mystery of the Silence Protocol. The shockwave from the grand chamber radiated outward, first as panic streams of data, then as formal diplomatic inquiries, and finally as a palpable wave of fear that rippled across the galactic networks. In their assigned quarters, a sterile but comfortable suite of rooms deep within the Citadel's diplomatic spire, Calyx and Ulla began the painstaking work of collating their experience. The Citadel's own systems were useless. Their logs for that 43-second period were a void, a clean slice of non-existence. It wasn't that the data was missing, it was as if the time itself had never been recorded. It was not a null-energy field, Ulla vibrated, her tendrils tracing complex equations on a holographic display. The equations kept dissolving into nonsense. A null field would have resulted in catastrophic system failures upon reactivation. This was a pause, a universal suspension, but the laws of thermodynamics weep at the very thought. Forget physics for a moment, Ulla. Focus on biology, Calyx instructed, his own appendages meticulously sorting through their biometric readings from the event. Our internal chronometers continued to function. My heart sacs maintained their rhythm. We experienced time, even if our technology did not. But Warlord Zax, Ulla trailed off, the memory causing her skin to ripple with uneasy gray. His reaction was not that of a being who simply sat in the dark for 43 seconds. It was a complete psychological collapse. The initial reports from the Cathar embassy claim he is in a catatonic state, repeating a single phrase in his native tongue. All the voices at once. All the voices at once, Calyx repeated, the phrase sending a shiver through his fluid-filled body. It implies a sensory experience, not an absence of stimulus but an overwhelming presence. Their first step was to consult the other delegates. It proved to be a lesson in galactic paranoia. The Kriya delegate, Preener Katak, received them in his aviary-like quarters, nervously hopping from one perch to another. Ghost tech. Forbidden science, he chirped, his feathers puffed in agitation. The humans delved into things they should not have during their dark age. Subspace harmonics, consciousness fields, they nearly erased themselves. The rumor has always been that they didn't destroy their ultimate weapons. They merely locked them away. This protocol, it must be one of them. The geode speaker, whose name was a complex series of crystalline resonances best translated as symmetry, offered a more measured, if equally baffled, perspective. They met in a chamber where the gravity was crushing, a comfort to the silicon life form. We have analyzed the residual spacetime metrics, symmetry resonated, its body glowing with a soft internal light. For that period, the fabric of our local reality was thinned, as if it were stretched taut over another, deeper dimension. We theorize the humans possess a method of temporarily shunting all technological energy into this alternate dimension, leaving only the most fundamental biological and physical processes intact. The energy cost would be astronomical, far beyond what their civilization appears capable of harnessing. Every delegate had a theory. It was a weapon of pure electromagnetic suppression. It was a mass hallucinatory psychic broadcast. It was a hyper-advanced computer virus that simultaneously infected every piece of technology in a given area. But every theory had a fatal flaw. An EMP would have fried circuits. A psychic attack would not have affected the geodes. A virus could not dim the lights. Frustrated, Calyx and Ulla retreated to the only place a Hydrian felt truly at home, the archives. Even light years away, their neural interfaces allowed them to walk the data halls of their homeworld as if they were physically there. They began their search, not for Silence Protocol, a name too new to be recorded, but for anomalies associated with the human species. Their search was a descent into a labyrinth of redactions and sealed files. Early human history was a chaotic mess, but their first century of interstellar travel was marked by a strange pattern. On at least 6 documented occasions, a burgeoning conflict involving human colonies had abruptly and inexplicably de-escalated. A fleet of space pirates poised to attack a human freighter suddenly surrendering without a fight. A hostile species preparing an invasion of a human outpost abruptly suing for peace, their ambassadors described as humbled and forever changed. In each case, there were no records of a battle, no energy signatures of weapons fire. Just a conflict and then a sudden and total resolution. And always a period of localized communications blackout. The durations varied. One was for 30 seconds, another for nearly a minute. They've used it before, Ulla sent, her awe tinged with fear. But never like this, never in the heart of the Galactic Council as a public declaration. It was not a declaration, Calyx corrected gently. It was a demonstration, a lesson. Warlord Zax threatened the galactic order. The humans showed him what a true threat to order looks like. Their search took them deeper, to the very edge of the Great Archives, to the section containing first contact reports. They found the Hydrian ship's log from its first encounter with a human vessel. The report was standard, describing their physiology, their FTL methods. But appended to the official log was a private entry from the archive keeper on board. Entry by Keeper Lyris. There is a stillness in the minds of these humans. When we established our customary low-level telepathic link for linguistic translation, we found walls. Not aggressive psychic shields, but something more fundamental. It feels like an echo of a scream that has been held for 1,000 years. There is a deep, quiet trauma in them, a species-wide wound that has been cauterized but never healed. They are polite, curious, but they keep a part of themselves held back, locked away in a silent room in their collective soul. I do not know what they fear, but I believe the entire galaxy should be grateful they are the ones who fear it. The words of Keeper Lyris resonated with what Calyx had felt in the chamber, the profound, unsettling weight of human silence. The true breakthrough came a week after the incident. A priority communique arrived from the Cathar Imperium. It was not a declaration of war. It was a notice of unconditional withdrawal from all 6 annexed territories. Furthermore, Warlord Zax had been permanently removed from his position and confined to a meditative sanctuary for the remainder of his life. The message was signed by a council of Cathar matrons, a governing body that had not been heard from in centuries. The galaxy was stunned. The human S-43-second demonstration had not just ended a military campaign. It had triggered a complete political and cultural upheaval within the most rigidly militaristic society in the Council. This new information gave Calyx an idea. He directed their archival search away from humanity and toward the Cathar. Specifically, he searched for deep-seated cultural phobias, religious dogma, and creation myths. "What are you looking for, First Archivist?" Ula asked, her avatar shimmering beside his in the data stream. "Every species has a concept of hell," Calyx explained. "An ultimate horror. For the geodes it is chaos, the loss of symmetry. For my people, it is the loss of memory, to be forgotten. For a species like the Cathar, built on the singular, unified will of the individual in service to the collective, what would be their hell?" They found it in a dusty, seldom accessed file on Cathar spiritualism. Their foundational myth spoke of a state of being called the cacophony of the unclawed. It was a presentient state where every Cathar grub lived as an individual driven by base instinct, its mind a storm of disconnected thoughts and fears. The path to becoming Cathar was the great sharpening, the process of subsuming the individual ego into the collective will of the Imperium, focusing the mind on a single purpose. To lose that focus, to be cast back into the cacophony of the self, was considered a fate worse than death. It was spiritual annihilation. "All the voices at once," Ula whispered, the phrase finally clicking into place. The protocol didn't show Warlord Zax something. It made him experience something. It forced his mind, and the minds of his entire fleet, out of their collective and back into the chaos of the individual. It was a terrifyingly elegant hypothesis. The Silence Protocol wasn't a weapon that destroyed ships or killed soldiers. It was a weapon that destroyed the very foundation of an enemy's identity. But the mechanism remained a mystery. How could the humans project such a fundamental change in consciousness? There was only one source left that might hold the answer. "We are going to the human embassy," Calyx announced, withdrawing from the archives. "It is time to ask the Silent Ones to speak." The human embassy was a monument to minimalism. Located in a quiet sector of the Citadel, it was a simple, unadorned structure of gray stone and clear glass. There were no flags, no honor guards, no displays of technological prowess. The air inside was clean, the light was natural, and the only sound was the gentle whisper of an atmospheric circulator. It was, Calyx realized, an environment designed to be empty of distraction, to force focus inward. They were met by a human aide, a young man who introduced himself as Kenji. He showed them to a waiting room that contained only 2 simple chairs and a low table with a single, perfect white flower in a vase. The silence was not the oppressive, unnatural silence of the protocol. It was a peaceful, contemplative silence, yet it felt just as deliberate. "Ambassador Reed will be with you shortly," Kenji said with a slight bow and left them. Ula coiled her tendrils nervously. "This place feels like a meditation chamber, not an embassy." "Perhaps to them there is no difference," Calyx mused. They did not have to wait long. Ambassador Evelyn Reed entered the room as silently as her aide had left. She wore simple gray robes, her face devoid of makeup, her graying hair tied back neatly. She looked more like a scholar than a diplomat who held the power to break empires. "First Archivist Calix, Archivist Ula," she said, her voice calm and even. She inclined her head in a gesture of respect. "Thank you for coming. I have been expecting you." Calix performed the Hydrian gesture of greeting, a slow unfurling of his primary tendrils. "Ambassador, we came because we must understand. As archivists, an event of such historical magnitude cannot be left as a blank page." Reed gestured to the chairs. "Please." She remained standing, her posture relaxed but attentive. Calix decided against subtlety. The humans valued directness even if they rarely practiced it themselves. "The silence protocol, we have theories, a space-time distortion, a psychic weapon, a mimetic virus. All of them are insufficient to explain what we witnessed. Specifically, what happened to Warlord Zax and the Cathar Imperium." Ambassador Reed's expression did not change, but Calix's sensitive chemoreceptors detected a minuscule shift in the air around her, a scent like ozone after a lightning strike, the smell of immense energy, carefully contained. "You are archivists," she said. "You seek to record facts. The fact is the Cathar threatened galactic peace and now they do not. The fact is a state of order has been restored." "That is the result, not the cause," Ula interjected, bolder than Calix had ever seen her. "The cause was 43 seconds of something. Warlord Zax spoke of all the voices at once. The Cathar founding myths speak of a cacophony of the individual mind. Did you force them to experience their own personal hell?" For the first time, a flicker of something, surprise, respect, crossed Reed's face. She looked at Ula, truly looked at her, and a slow, faint smile touched her lips. "You are very good at your work, Archivist Ula," she said softly. "You have pieced together the edges of the truth, but the center of it, the center is not a weapon. It is a key." She walked over to the large window that looked out onto the star-dusted expanse of the galaxy. "My species, as you know, is young, but we are also very, very old. We almost destroyed ourselves long before we reached the stars. We unleashed weapons that tore at the fabric of our world, our bodies, our minds. In our darkest hour, on the brink of total extinction, in a moment of collective despair and terror, we touched something." Calix and Ula waited, every sensor focused on her. "It is not something that can be easily described in your languages or even in mine," Reed continued, her voice taking on a distant, solemn quality. "It is not a god, it is not an energy field, it is a substrate, a fundamental layer of reality where consciousness is not an emergent property of complex biology, but a universal constant. Every thought ever thought, every feeling ever felt, every life that has ever sparked and died, leaves an imprint there. It is the great archive you seek to build, but it is alive. It is the memory of the universe itself." Calix felt a profound tremor run through him, a resonance with his deepest purpose as an archivist. A living, universal archive. "When we almost died," Reed said, turning back to them, "we tore a hole in the veil between our reality and that one. And we learned to open that hole just for a moment. That is the silence protocol. It is not a weapon that attacks. It is a key that unlocks a door. For 43 seconds, we do not project anything outward. We simply open a gate, and we let the universe in." The simplicity and the sheer, overwhelming scale of her explanation left Calix speechless. "The technology isn't silenced," he finally managed, his voice a rasp. "It is drowned out, overwhelmed by the raw data of existence." "Precisely," Reed affirmed. "Every piece of technology you have is designed to process specific, limited sets of information. It cannot handle the input of 1 billion years of cosmic history poured into it at once. So it stops, it can do nothing else." "And the living?" Ula whispered. "Warlord Zax." Reed's expression grew somber. "A mind, a consciousness, is more resilient. It does not stop, but it is forced to listen." For 43 seconds, Warlord Zax and every Cathar in his fleet was no longer a single, sharpened will. He was connected to the substrate. He felt what the people of the worlds he annexed felt. He felt the terror of his own soldiers. He felt the life cycle of a star and the fear of a microbe being consumed. He experienced the joy, the pain, the love, the hate, the birth, and the death of every sentient being that has ever existed within the range of the effect. He was subjected to the ultimate, unfiltered empathy. He heard all the voices at once. Calyx finally understood the blank, catatonic horror on the warlord's face. To a mind built on singular purpose, a mind that feared the chaos of the individual self, being forcibly connected to the infinite consciousness of everyone everywhere for all time. It was not just psychological collapse. It was the total dissolution of the self, a baptism in the ocean of infinity. "Why 43 seconds?" Calyx asked, the last piece of the puzzle. "It is the longest duration the average human mind can withstand the exposure without permanently losing its own identity," Reed said simply. "It is the edge of the abyss, we know because our ancestors fell into it." There it was, the cauterized wound keeper Lyris had sensed, the great trauma at the heart of humanity. They had not just invented a key. They had stumbled through the door and barely made it back, forever changed by the experience. Their silence in the council was not arrogance or indifference. It was the solemn, weary quiet of a people who had looked into the face of infinity and were now burdened with the knowledge of how to show it to others. It was not a weapon they brandished, but a terrible responsibility they carried. "This knowledge," Calyx began, his mind reeling with the implications. "We must record it. It is the most significant discovery in galactic history." Ambassador Reed gave a slow, deliberate nod. We have known for some time that we could not keep this secret forever. We chose to show it to the Council because the Cathar threat was metastasizing, and a quick, sharp lesson was kinder than a long, bloody war. And I am telling you, First Archivist, because your species does not seek power. You seek understanding. You, of all species, might be able to comprehend the burden of this knowledge without trying to turn it into a weapon. She took a step closer, her human eyes meeting Calyx's stalk-mounted ones. "Record what you must, but understand this. The silence protocol is not our strength. It is our shame, a reminder of how close we came to non-existence. We use it only to prevent others from making the same mistakes we did, to force a moment of reflection, of empathy, in those who have forgotten it. We pray for the day we never have to use it again." Calyx and Ula left the embassy and moved through the Citadel's bustling corridors in a state of profound contemplation. The cacophony of 1,000 species talking, trading, and arguing no longer sounded like chaotic friction to Calyx. He heard it now as the humans must. A chorus of individual voices, each one a precious thread in the great tapestry, each one a part of the infinite song. Days later, the Galactic Council convened again. The mood was somber, transformed. The Cathar pod was occupied by a quiet, unassuming matron who spoke only to affirm the Imperium's commitment to peace and reparations. There was no boasting, no threats. The hammer of the galaxy had been replaced by a penitent. Calyx took his seat, Ula beside him. His skin was a calm, deep blue. He looked across the chamber to the human pod. Ambassador Reed was there, as still and silent as always. But her silence was no longer an empty void to him. It was full. It was pregnant with the weight of a billion lives, with the echoes of every voice in the universe. Their eyes met across the expanse. Evelyn Reed gave him the smallest, most imperceptible of nods. It was an acknowledgement, a shared burden, a passing of a torch not of power but of understanding. Ula's tendril gently brushed his. "What will we write in the archives, First Archivist?" She vibrated, her signal no longer laced with anxiety, but with a new, heavy solemnity. Calyx gazed at the assembly of beings, at the complex, beautiful, and fragile peace they had forged. He thought of the key the humans held, the door to universal empathy that was also a door to madness. "We will write the truth," Calyx sent back. "We will record that true power is not the ability to silence others, but the courage to listen to them. All of them, all at once." And in the great, clamoring hall of the galaxy, the Hydrian archivist sat in quiet contemplation, beginning the first entry in a new volume of history, finally understanding the profound and terrible power of silence.